Welcome to this AISMA Finance Clinic in association with Practice Index. We're three AISMA accountants here today, myself, James Gransby, got Abby Newbury and Andrew Burwood joining us again. And today the topic is, what can practice managers do to make their practices attractive to potential new partners? Probably a good place to start is breaking down that question into its two component parts. What can practice managers do to make their practices attractive to new potential partners? So let's start with what would make a practice attractive to a potential new partner? I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, Abby. We can go through a few topics.
James, that's actually, it's a really interesting area. Obviously, as accountants, we're looking at the financial aspects for practices and how they attract new partners. And that's obviously a big area and something that the new partners considering practice are really interested in. It's important that they understand about that. But in actual fact, there's actually lots of other things that practice managers can do and need to think about that would attract a new partner to their practice. Things like work-life balance, new partners, yes, they're going to be hardworking, they're going to step into an environment that is going to be very, very demanding. But as far as a practice manager helping encourage and show that the practice is a welcoming place to work, there are all sorts of things that can be done in that respect. I think one of the most important things is to show that you're all working as a team. I think it needs to be, you're looking at both the finance partner, the partners, the team, and the practice manager, showing a cohesive working team for that new partner to step into a role. So you may be a high earning practice, you may be, an average earning practice, but there will be a lot of demand in the local area for that new partner. And if you can make your practice as attractive as possible by looking at whether it's you've got a good work time balance, you're well run, you've got a cohesive team, I think there are lots of elements there that you need to take into account and could actually actively manage to help bring that new partner on board to your practice rather than one of the other practices.
Thank you, Abby. I think that's a really important message, isn't it? We're going to be looking at the finances quite a bit as part of this podcast, but actually it's some of the more esoteric and cultural and work-life balance, environmental, making sure they've got the equipment they need, very much so alongside the financial. Just thinking about the financial and bringing Andrew in, what sort of things would make a practice look financially attractive to new partners?
Thank you, James, and hello, everybody. There is a tendency, I believe, to perhaps you need to look at the bigger picture in terms of it's not just about the numbers. The numbers, I would think, for the majority of practices at the moment speak for themselves. It's all about, as Abby was alluding to previously, that work-life balance, but also having the team structure in place so that you can actually meet patient demand. We know that there's a huge push now to get even more vaccinations into people, having heard the announcements coming out from government. And clearly that is important, but there are still a number of patients that do need to see their doctors, their healthcare providers, whoever it may be, with their own conditions as well. So that work-life balance, we talk about it frequently. That's probably more important than ever because the demands on general practice are greater than they've ever been. And this is where the practice managers and the practice team really come to the fore in terms of selling the vision and showing how a well-oiled and well-run practice can make such a big difference.
Thank you, Andrew. And I know each of you will each have potential new partners come up to you, either from practices that you're acting for or practices that you don't act for. Quite often I'll get a partner come up to me and say, look, I've been offered a partnership at this practice. Here's a set of the accounts. Can you interpret them for me? Is this a good practice or not? So just turning to Abby now, when a partner comes up to you and gives you a set of accounts, what are the sort of things that you're looking at from a financial perspective to assess that?
Absolutely, James. I do this on quite a regular basis, both with practices where I haven't seen the accounts previously, or within my own practices where they've got a partner joining. And generally, when I'm writing to them, I prepare something like a 6 to 7 page report. There is a lot of things in there that they need to be aware of. Simple things like what's the practice year end, because that can make a change as to how they're taxed and how they get sort of need to plan for saving their tax. Things like drawings are very interesting. Often a new partner will find, they think, oh, I'm going to be a partner, my drawings will go up greatly. Well, yes, to some extent, perhaps, especially with the increase in profits at the moment. But when you factor in that they need to be investing in the practice, and that's probably something that maybe Andy will touch on, they need to be investing in the practice, they've got to save for their tax, they've got the new timing on tax where you have to make payments in advance. And I always make sure that I talk to new partners about the changes from PAYE to making payments in advance for their tax. Often when you run the calculations, you will find it's actually, there's not a great deal of wriggle room, particularly if they've got student loans or the interest is you're going to lose personal allowance, things like that. So general things, is there a partnership agreement? Are there any disputes? You don't want to be walking into a practice, particularly where there have been issues. And again, you put a partnership, a practice that is well run and has thought about things like this before and has got a partnership agreement in place, you're a lot less likely to have issues where you walk in. So there's a number of different things that you can highlight to a practice where you can think ahead and you can see whether or not on paper they're walking into something that could be problematical. Probably another important one, service charges. I've seen a lot of practices with NHS properties where they've got huge service charge liabilities, a great deal of uncertainty behind that. You always need to be thinking not just about the profit that you're going to be taking home, but some of the liabilities sitting behind that, whether the practice has got money saved to pay over those liabilities in case they're asked to actually pay for those, and making sure that you're fully aware of all everything that can be gleaned from those accounts. I would always advise that you make sure that you have a specialist looking at the practice accounts, because we can tell an awful lot from what is in there. We're looking at them on a very regular basis, and some of it is in plain sight, some of it you need to look a bit deeper and you need to understand what's going on behind it.
Thank you, Abby. I've just been making some notes as you were talking there. There's a couple of the things that are noted. You mentioned that some of the profits are higher in some practices this year because of the COVID response and practices' involvement in that. Some practices, if they have been done at PCN level, there might be some that haven't had the profit increase. But an important point to take away is if there's an increase in profits from one year to the next, when somebody's assessing those accounts, probably need to strip out those one-off increases, because otherwise you haven't got the underlying trend of what the profits might be. It might look good that year, but then you join and in the following year it doesn't repeat and you think, hold on, I thought I was joining at a higher amount per session than this. So that's one important point.
And also, James, to knock on to drawings for that, because if the partners start to get used to drawing on that level, and then it's going to go down, that's really important.
Exactly. Yeah. And in that first year, when partners are building up capital potentially as well in the practice, that has a restriction on the drawings. And what I was just conscious of, where we've got the topic of what can practice managers do, when I turn to Andrew in a minute, what can practice managers do to help? And I've got a couple of specific points. So you mentioned about reserves and service charges, Abby. So a question for Andrew, I've got two things in mind. One is repairs reserves for practices that build up a war chest, if you like, for future repairs. I'll ask Andrew about that. And then secondly, tax reserves to keep drawings on an even keel throughout. So repairs reserves and tax reserves as two examples of something that the practice manager might control. Andrew, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so in terms of repairs, really there needs to be a distinction between whether or not the partners own a surgery premises or whether they are leased from a third party. If they are leased from a third party, the chances are within the lease agreement there will be a dilapidations clause. So in other words, you have to maintain that building in the state in which you found it. So one of the challenges that practices actually have is whether they do an ongoing maintenance program, so they are constantly keeping on top of damage caused to walls, internals, whatever it may be, or whether they do it periodically. Perhaps every 4 to 5 years they go through a full internal redecoration process. That's always something that I stress to my practices that it's really important to keep an eye on, especially in the years where there are partnership changes as well. So the example that I always give is if you've got a partner who's coming up to retirement, say at year 4, They then leave, year 5, new partner joins, and then all of a sudden there is a 5-figure sum for repair costs to be done. Exiting partner, with added dilapidations provision in the accounts, picks up a full, exiting partner doesn't pick up any share of that cost. New partner, bless him or her, has to pick up a full share of those costs when coming on board. So that's something that's really important. Also, if you own the property as well, you could have within your partnership a situation whereby the property is part owned by some of the partners, but not necessarily all of them. So that needs to be built into the partnership agreement as well in terms of where that responsibility lies. So that's really important as well. Was the next one talking about tax provisions?
Yeah, really, just with the thought of if somebody's moving from a salary GP to a partner position, they're probably used to having the net pay going into their bank account each month being theirs to keep. But as a partner, some practices will ask them to save for their tax themselves, others will save it for them. Either way is a very, is a good way of doing it, but you just have to manage. People have to realise which method the practice is using. Do you have a preference at all of tax reserve versus not?
From an accountancy perspective and being the cautious accountant, I would prefer for it to be saved for within the practice, so the partners are taking their money out net of tax, knowing that as those liabilities fall due for payment, the practice can make those on their behalf and they don't have to worry about it. There is, however, an argument for individuals to be paid out gross, because if they have something such as an offset mortgage arrangement, that can be quite helpful for them in terms of the money is sitting in their bank account for several months. It reduces the interest that you pay on your mortgage. There's clearly quite an attractiveness to that, particularly given where we are with interest rates at this point in time. The most important thing, as you say, James, is that individuals are completely aware of where the liabilities sit, but also get forward forecasts of what those liabilities are as well. When you join a practice, there is potentially at the moment a period of up to, say, 18 months before you make your first payment on payment on account of tax through self-assessment. And that first payment, how taxes actually work at this point in time, can be very, very significant indeed. So you've got to be able to prepare for that as well. There is a basis year reform which is going through with effect from April 2023. We could spend a whole session on that today talking about that, but we won't do that. The most important thing, as Abby said, is that you understand what the practice year end is and the basis on which your profit share is then taxed. So again, as part of that onboarding process, the practice manager can absolutely help with that, as can the accountant in terms of reviewing those accounts and working with the practice manager and the incoming partner to understand and set the scene. And I think Abby was going to talk about just making use of the practice accountant and not being afraid to contact us. So Abby, that seems to tie in nicely to what you were going to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. It's a funny old thing, isn't it? I think, practice managers, that they are, they have such a large role, all encompassing, trying to keep everybody under control, from the senior partners to the reception team. There's a lot there, and I think as I said before, to sort of put this all on the practice manager, there's lots and lots of things that the practice manager can do, but I think they need to draw on support, almost like a sort of consultant pulling on different areas for support. I don't think they should be shy in introducing potential partners to their practice accountant. I've offered, to a practice and said, if you pay for me to speak to the prospective partner, we can run through all of this. They can be happy and comfortable. I think it's all about, they're people, just like you and I. It's all about being comfortable, about feeling that right fit, and whatever can be done where you have somebody that is looking at joining your practice as a long-term happy team player. Anything you can do to help that is great. So I think, yes, if practice managers, usually they should have a really great relationship with the practice accountant and the practice accountant team in any way. So often, they probably will ask the question, but I think, if they speak to the finance partner, say, look, the accountant would be more than happy to do this. Let's get them talking. Let's set out some of the things they need to think about, because even if you manage to get that partner to join with you, they don't want to find that there are shocks with tax or drawings or anything down the line, or there's things that they're not understanding. I think the other thing that's really important is that the practice manager has a sort of direct line through, so that if there's things they're not sure of, they can ask. They've got a good handle on the sort of pension forms. They can talk sensibly to the new prospective partner where they have questions arising. That prospective partner wants to know that there is a level of a well-run practice. They need to know that they can ask questions and they'll get a sensible answer. If the practice manager doesn't know, she's got a way to find out and come back to them. So I think that sort of approach has got to be good. One of the other things that I want to talk about, which is quite basic, is the bookkeeping. Because, in general, obviously, we all know it's so busy for practice managers. The bookkeeping is kind of, we nag as accountants, keep it up to date. But it's so important. If I was a new partner coming to a practice, you want to know they've got a handle on the figures. They know where they are now, not 3 months ago, 4 months ago. They haven't let payments slip. They're making sure they're being paid for the work they're doing by checking claims and making sure that everything is running properly financially. And the bookkeeping is the absolute sort of baseline for that to be keeping on top of. So again, rather basic from that point of view, but I think it's really important that the partnership team can make sure the practice manager's got everything she needs or he needs to be supported in doing that function. Because again, new partners, they will ask other accountants, they will ask questions, and it may be, the finances, yes, but there are lots of other elements. And if they see that the practice isn't being run as well as perhaps it could, or indeed, they're a bit slower on the uptake, maybe a little less technologically savvy than the one down the road, it may well be the tipping point to decide to go elsewhere.
Thank you, Abby. Just conscious that we're running up close to the end of our time now. So I just there's one really interesting and important topic that I wanted to make sure we had covered, which was the new to partnership incentive. So just quickly, as by way of background, this is up to £24,000, 20,000 plus a 20% extra available for anybody becoming a partner for the first time. We've had some good news. We're recording this mid-December 2021. We've had some good news in the last week that where this was a preliminary 2-year window up to March 2022, that's now been extended to March 2023, which is fantastic. There was a 6-month ability. You couldn't claim it outside of the 6-month window of when you first become partner. That's been relaxed. And also anybody last year that missed the deadline of 6 months, they're going to look back retrospectively and allow them that new to partnership incentive now. So just wanted to cover that. But on the ground, have either of you seen, so maybe thinking of coming to Andrew now, have you seen that make a difference for those becoming a partner, that amount, and what do they use that money for?
Yes, definitely. I've got one practice where there have been 3 new partners, not all GPs, but other partners as well. And it has pretty much covered their buy-in to working capital fixture and fittings. The one thing to bear in mind, of course, is that it is subject to tax and it's not pensionable, which is good news, but it is subject to tax. There is also a 5-year clawback window in terms of if you leave that practice within 5 years of joining, then NHS England can claw some of that funding back. So what we have done in our accounts is create new to partnership capital accounts, and that money is then dripped into their capital accounts over that 5-year period, so that they know that if they leave the practice within that 5-year window, they then don't have to find that money to pay back to NHS England. It's all dealt within the practice. So in general, it should cover all capital requirements. The one thing it won't cover is if the practice owns the surgery premises and you're looking to buy into those, the chances are it won't cover that. You would have to make alternate arrangements, or the practice may finance that via a single partnership loan. But in principle, it's a fantastic arrangement. You do have to rely for the tax, but absolutely, yes, it goes a very long way to contributing to that working capital and other assets that you have to contribute to.
Yeah, and any final thoughts on that, Abby, before we wrap up?
Yeah, just, I mean, yes, it's good to quantify it. I have practices and they say, yes, we're going to get £24,000. That will help with the buy-in. And you go, well, hang on. In actual fact, for a full-timer, that kind of boils down to about 14,000. So it's potentially quite a lot less than they might have thought. But again, with the practice accountant, with the finance partners, the practice manager can be giving an indication, what amount, how much are we needing to look at? What period is reasonable to be buying into? And that ties in with the drawings. I think the whole subject really revolves around looking forward, thinking about the things that need to be thought about, and making sure that you do that from the start. so that anybody that is looking at coming into practice, because a lot of these new partners won't have been in business before, they won't understand, you know, any of the elements. You know, there are guides out there. I know AISMA has a guide to a new GP partner guide, which I often provide to new partners and those thinking about it. But you know, there's so much to think about. So it's just trying to tie in all those elements. Speak to the accountant, get a list of the things that need to be thought about, think about the things that the practice manager can do, things like the pension forms, general advice, making them feel comfortable, looking at the practice as a whole and doing what they do best, which is running the practice and helping that practice be as profitable as possible. But also there are a number of other things that I don't think you would expect the practice manager to be able to deal with all of that, and that's where they need some support.
Perfect. Thank you, Abby. And it's a good plug for the AISMA New to Partner Guide as well, which is over 20 pages long, and so it's very comprehensive, all up to date. And if you need one of those, any of the AISMA accountants, there's about 75 AISMA accountants looking after about half of all GPs in the country, so you'll find us easily on the website. Well, that leaves me to just say thank you, Abby. Thank you, Andrew, for your participation today. I thought it was a really good podcast. We could have carried on talking for a lot longer, but in the interest of time, we'll need to wrap it up there. We hope this has been useful for everybody. Look out for us in a future podcast. In the meantime, if we can be of any assistance, please let us know, or please find an AISMA accountant on our website.